When America starts dropping bombs on Iran, the first casualty is usually nuance. Half the country wants to spike the football, and the other half wants to act like every use of force is automatically World War III and unforgivable. And somewhere in the middle sits reality. It is messy, it is dangerous, and it is costly, but it is reality. So, as of late Monday, March 2nd, the time of this recording, this is no longer a one night strike story. Reuters and AP report the conflict has widened. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is confirmed dead, and the U.S. and Israel are still striking Iranian targets. And the U.S. military now says that 6 American service members have been killed in the conflict as of right now. Now, I want to do something almost illegal in modern media. I want to talk about the pros, the cons, what we know and what we don't know, without pretending this is a superhero movie where everybody already knows who the good guys are and how the final act wraps up. Now, the case for the strikes is not hard to understand. Iran's regime has spent years funding proxies, threatening Israel, targeting regional shipping and U.S. interests, and building missile and nuclear-related capability that its enemies see as intolerable. The AP reports that President Trump says the operation may last 4 to 5 weeks and is aimed at destroying Iran's missile capability, crippling its navy, and preventing it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Both Reuters and AP note that the campaign has already decapitated major parts of Iran's power structure and hit more than 1,000 targets. Now, that argument is not irrational because, look, government is not a scented candle. It's not a fluffy stuffed animal. Romans 13, verse 4 says the civil ruler, quote, does not bear the sword in vain, which means there is a real biblical category for the state using force to restrain evil and defend the innocent. A nation is not morally unserious because it fights back. There are moments when refusing to confront aggression doesn't produce peace. It actually just delays the bill. But here's the other side, and it matters just as much. Military force can be justified in principle and still become strategically reckless in practice. As Americans, we've seen that movie before, and the sequels are expensive. Now, let's talk about constitutional powers, all right? Because this is where a lot of people now are talking really big and reading nothing. Now, I actually did research on this. I have fact-checked the fact-checkers. Here's the truth about this. The president does have real constitutional authority here, but not unlimited authority. Under Article 2, the president is the commander-in-chief. A Constitution annotated explains that the war powers framework was designed to redistribute war powers between the president and Congress. And it describes the president's troop commitment power as limited to a declaration of war, number 1, number 2, a specific statutory authorization, or number 3, a national emergency created by an attack on the United States, its territories, possessions, or armed forces. That's a quote. It also notes that absent a declaration of war, the president must report to Congress within 48 hours, and troop use in hostilities generally must terminate within 60 days unless Congress authorizes more. And here's where another warning sign comes in, maybe even larger than that. The U.S. Senate's own historical office says that Congress approved its last formal declaration of war during World War II. Okay, it's been 80 years since Congress has declared war on any country, on any nation, anywhere. Since then, Congress has relied on resolutions authorizing the use of military force instead of formal declarations. Now, you might say, well, what about Desert Storm in 1991? Well, that includes Desert Storm, which the House records describe not as a declaration of war, but as a resolution, a joint resolution authorizing President George H.W. Bush to use military force against Iraq. Now, just because they haven't authorized or made a declaration of war, they being Congress, that does not automatically mean that every later use of force was unlawful. Again, the Constitution annotated does express that Congress can authorize military action short of a full-scale declared war. But it does add weight to the concern that over decades, both Congress and we as a nation have grown more comfortable letting war-making power drift toward the executive chair. That is, at least something that we should be considering and watching carefully, because once power centralizes, government rarely volunteers to hand it back. Now, that's just an inference from a long-term historical pattern. It's not a direct constitutional holding, just something to keep an eye on. Now, Congress itself is not just a Christmas tree ornament here. Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has the power to declare war, quote unquote. The War Powers Resolution says that its purpose is to ensure the, quote, collective judgment of both Congress and the president, that both those judgments apply when U.S. forces are introduced into hostilities, and that the president must consult with Congress in every possible instance, quote unquote, before doing so. So yes, Trump has actual constitutional authority to command and direct forces, and even in this instance. But no, that does not mean the presidency is a blank check with wings on it. Now here's where the story gets more difficult. The administration's public case and the intelligence picture are not perfectly lining up. I want to show you this post from Matt Walsh, commentator. He notes, and he is correct here. He says, so far, we've heard that although we killed the whole Iranian regime, this was not a regime change. And although we obliterated their nuclear program, we had to do this because of their nuclear program. And although Iran was not planning any attacks on the U.S., they also might have been, depending on who you ask. And although we're not fighting this war to free the Iranian people, they are now free, or they might be, depending on who seizes power, and we have no idea who that will be. He closes by saying the messaging on this thing is, to put it mildly, confused. And he's not wrong. Now, Reuters reports that the Trump administration officials told congressional staff in closed-door briefings there was no intelligence suggesting Iran planned to attack U.S. forces first, even while officials were arguing publicly that Iran's missiles and proxy network pose an imminent threat to U.S. interests. That distinction is a very big deal, but it does not automatically make the strikes unlawful. However, it does mean the public, we the people, need to be careful when we're reading and posting slogans like "we had no choice" or something like that, unless the evidence is actually shown. Proverbs 18, verse 13 warns against answering a matter before hearing it, and that verse applies to governments, to pundits, and everybody, all the rest of us. Now for what we know. We know the conflict is widening geographically and economically. AP reports that the war is already affecting places like Dubai, leaving hundreds of thousands of airline passengers stranded and hitting energy infrastructure in the Gulf. Reuters reports the U.S. is now urging Americans to immediately depart more than a dozen Middle Eastern countries, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Reuters also reports that the U.S. Embassy complex in Riyadh was hit by 2 drones, causing limited fire and damage. And if that wasn't enough, reports are now saying that shipping disruption and fears around the Strait of Hormuz have pushed oil and gas prices sharply higher, with more than 20% of global oil moving through that corridor. This is not just a foreign policy story anymore. This is an oil story, it's an inflation story, and potentially a homeland security story. Now, we also know the human cost is climbing. According to the AP, the Iranian Red Crescent says at least 555 people have been killed in the U.S.-Israeli operation. 11 people were killed in Israel by Iranian strikes, and fighting has spread now into Lebanon. AP also reports that the U.S. military says 3 American F-15E Strike Eagles were mistakenly downed by friendly Kuwaiti fire, though all 6 pilots did eject and were in stable condition. Now, this is a reminder that war does not stay neat and tidy, nor does it stay under control just because officials have a habit of saying the word precision at the podiums. But now here's what we don't know. Because this is where honest people part company with propagandists, and we're not propagandists here. The truth is, no one knows the full end game. We do not know what the end game is. The conflict shows no signs of abating, according to the Associated Press, and still lacks an apparent exit plan. Reuters notes that U.S. officials are skeptical that decapitating leadership automatically means regime change in Tehran, especially since Iran's version of their cabinet, they agree with Khamenei. They want to put the same regime back in place. Now, we do not know whether these strikes produce durable deterrence or whether they open the door to a longer and more chaotic regional war. We do not know whether this remains mostly a Middle East battlefield problem or becomes more of a homeland threat problem. Reuters did report that a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, intelligence assessment says Iran and its proxies probably throws a persistent threat of targeted attacks in the homeland, while a large-scale physical attack is unlikely in the short term. So what does that mean? Well, cyber attacks and retaliatory actions are seen as more likely, again, according to DHS. We also do not know the full truth about the nuclear dimension yet. The IAEA said Iran had not provided access to verify the suspension of all enrichment and related activities. So that means that sweeping claims like the threat is fully neutralized need to be treated carefully and with caution until independent verification catches up with battlefield claims. That's why verses like James 1:19 matter so much in moments like these. It says, be quick to hear and slow to speak. And Psalm 20, verse 7 matters too. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Military power is real, but it is not ultimate. So here's the bottom line, and it is sobering. President Trump does have real constitutional authority as commander-in-chief to direct military action, especially where the administration argues U.S. interests and forces face imminent danger. And that applies in this case, at least so far. But Congress still has the power of war declaration, and the war powers framework still exists for a reason. The strikes may, in time, prove strategically necessary and prove that President Trump is well within his constitutional authority. But the strikes also may prove to be the front end of another long conflict sold with too much confidence, too little transparency. The balanced answer right now, I believe, is not chest thumping on one side or panic on the other. It's not name calling. It's not further dividing, but it's vigilance. It's restraint. It's constitutional seriousness. If you're going to make a constitutional claim about what the president can and can't do, then get a copy of the Constitution, read it, study it, and understand what we're talking about. And we also need the discipline to admit what we still do not know. Micah 6:8, I quote the verse all the time on Culture Crossroads and on these videos. It says to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. In a moment like this, that humility may be the rarest thing we see in public life, but it also may be the most important. Hey, would you do me a favor? This was simply designed to give you the facts, just what's going on, not my opinion about it, not anyone else's opinion about it, just what's happening. Because there's enough narrative, there's enough spin, there's enough sensational headlines to go around, wouldn't you think? Listen, if this kind of content is valuable to you, if you like this content, would you do me a favor? Yes, like the video. Please do that. Like and subscribe to the channel. But also, write in the comments, let me know somehow. Say, hey, more of this. How about that? Write the phrase, more of this in the comments, and I'll bring you just the facts on this situation as it develops every day to the very best of my ability. I've got plenty of opinions, but this is not a time for my opinion right now, nor is it a time for most of our opinion. We need the humility that I just spoke about. So I want to bring you this report and others like it. And again, if you like it, put more of this in the comments below. And thank you again for watching.